Well, I was born in Colorado in 1925 in the town of Boulder. I don't know if anybody's ever seen that town, but I graduated from Boulder High School in 1943, and I was drafted in August of 43. So I went into the service 18 years old, and they took, they gave us all this mental test, you know, and I got into the top 10%. So they said, you can go in the Air Corps if you wanted to. So I always wanted to be a pilot, but I didn't quite make that. I was one of those guys that, they need a lot of gunners in those days. So they said, you can still fly, you can get your wings. And so I took that. I went to my basic training was in Shepherd Field, Texas. And after that, I went to gunnery school in Harlingen. I suppose there's a few that know where that is. First plane I ever flew in was an AT-6. And I got in this plane, and you're sitting backwards, you know. We're going up to shoot at tow targets drawn by lady pilots in the WAF, I think they called them. And they were pulling these tow targets in B-24, which was a tough plane to fly, I guess, anyway. But incidentally, I met a gal that did that up at the north, you know, the museum they have up north there. And so she wanted our picture taken together because she'd known we had done this together. Anyhow, here I am up in this, first time I've ever been in an airplane. And the pilot says, when you get through shooting, says, wave your gun up and down, and then turn that backward, sit down, and so here I'm, and then I wave my gun up and down, sit down, and he takes that thing and goes just like this, you know, right down over the Gulf, you know, and I can see these white caps and stuff, and my cheeks are hanging down to here. Well, that was my first experience in flying. Well, anyhow, after we went through gunnery school, I went to Lincoln, Nebraska to join my crew and pick up our new airplane, had a new shiny B-24. And so they needed a picture on it, of course. So they drafted me. I do a little painting. So I painted a picture of a scantily clad lady. And we called it the Homeward Angel. And we went to, from there we flew up to Boise on a special mission. Don knows about this because it was Operation Pinball, where we shot at P-39s with plastic bullets, you know, and then there was a little light in the spinner would light if you hit the plane. I don't know if I ever hit it, but he was in on that deal. And I don't know if up there, but...
Never hit me.
Well, after we picked up the crew, and we went from there to Bangor, Maine, Newfoundland, the Azores. I know there's a lot of people have gone there. Into North Africa. And from North Africa, we went to Venosa, Italy. That's a real small town. It was a 485th Bomb Group, and so I was assigned to the 829th Bomb Squadron. And incidentally, I was a tail gunner on this B-24. So we put in 35 missions, and I returned in March 30th of 1945. One of the missions that we had, we were lucky. We were over there a little later when a lot of the fighters were not flying anymore. They just, you know, they'd hit you out of the clouds and stuff like that. So we went on this one mission that's particularly that I remember was the 10th mission of July 26th. We were supposed to bomb 2 targets that day. The name of the first one was, now I don't know how to pronounce this stuff, but Wolfboxing Aerodrome in Vienna. That was the first one. And the second one was some Beth Haley or something like that, Hungary. Well, they were supposed to, there was 34 B-24s took off, and they rendezvoused with the 460th Bomb Group and the escort. And we got up close to the target. I can't remember whether we found the first one or not, but we were in KLN Charlie, number 7 in the box. And we were flying along there. My co-pilot, his name was Merton W. Baker. I don't know if any of you remember Fibber McGinn Molly, where he'd go on the phone and he'd say, and then he'd get his answer, he'd say, "Is that you, Mert?" You remember that? Well, every time he called me up on the intercom, I'd always say, "Is that you, Mert?" No. Well, he said, "Watch those guys out there." He says, "That looks like they're going to turn in." And it wasn't but about 2 seconds later, the ME-109 went like this past the tail. I could hear that, you know, how it ripped right through the plane. And I took a burst at that guy on his way down, and both of my guns jammed. Neither one of them would work. In those days, this was a brand new plane, and they had put link chutes on the guns so that the armors didn't have to clean all them links out the bottom of the turret, you know. And they had turned just that way and jammed both of the guns. Lucky I had a screwdriver in there with me. So I'm out here, I'm prying on that gun, and I got the left one working. But about that time, upper gunner says, 6 o'clock, he says, there are 2 FW-190s. And I look back, here they're coming up through the vapor trails, you know. They must have been, 1,000 yards or more away. So I take this one left gun, and I took one burst at one, little puff of smoke came out, dropped these wheels, and he took off. The other one, he just kept coming. And I'm spraying this guy because that one gun's pulling that turret around like crazy, you know. And he comes up close enough, you can see his goggles, you know, and he's that close, but there's fire coming out from the cowling. And he goes down. Ball gunner says, "That's the way to go, Ben." But I didn't see him explode, so all I got was a probable and a damage that day. That's really the only time we really got hit by fighters. But when that ME-109 made the pass from the nose, 20 millimeter shell went in front of the number 3 engine and right behind the co-pilot and hit the navigator, was sitting in the radio operator's chair. He didn't like to be down in the nose. And he didn't want to get shot down. He was Jewish, and he says, "I know that if I get shot down, that's going to be bad." But it went through his flak suit, exploded inside of him, and so that was our only real casualty on our crew. And when the FW-190s were coming up from the back, he popped a couple of 20 millimeters right up where the stabilizer hooks on. And so he was trying to kill me too, I guess, I don't know. Well, anyhow, we got back okay. Then that shell took the prop governor right off the number 3 engine, and the thing flew all the way back. Never missed that thing. And after I finished my 35, the last mission we had was a milk run. I was glad of that. We didn't have too much flak. Flak was tough up until that time. Our first 2 missions were over Vienna and Munich. And you know, a green kid, I'm 19 years old. I'm sitting back there looking around like, nothing's going on, you know. We get 16 holes in the plane from flak. And they seem to get less every mission you flew. And if you get 2 or 3 on the 30th, like, boy, you think it's something. But we finished, and I sat right on the radar ball when I went on my last mission. Never had a gun or anything. I just sat on my flak suit, pulled my helmet down over my head, and got through that 35th and got out, kissed the ground and all that. So, you know. So after that, we came back overseas. I came back on a ship called the Mariposa. It was a liner. And we hit, big 20-foot waves and stuff. And the old back end would come out and the screw would go boom, 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 boom. And I never got, not seasick, but about 90% of the guys on there got seasick. And I guess because of the way the tail goes in that airplane, got kind of used to it. But we got home, and after a leave, I went to training down in Laredo, Texas, for remote control turrets. They were on the B-29s then. And went home for another leave, and I was stationed in Las Vegas, Nevada for the rest of the war. And it was so close, that the war in Europe had already ended. And we heard about the big bomb, and we thought it was going to end. We'd go into the classroom, and the young guys would come in and say, we're giving, you know this, you know this, you know this. Okay, then we go play pinochle. So I got my discharge, got married in 1950, had 4 kids, and by golly, I'm still married to the same gal. So that's about my story.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you.
The Spanish king at the time honored all of his generals that fought in wars for Spain by giving them parcels of land, including the dividing of Guatemala into 16 parcels, and 16 people were recipients of that acreage of Guatemala. Most of them never ever went over to see what it was like. It was a grant by the king. It was their property. There were no taxes charged for it or anything of the sort. And as I said, very few of them ever even went to see it, nor did their heirs. The natives of Guatemala were Indian, basically, coming out of the Aztec Indian groups that were traveling toward North America from South America, and they were squatters. They simply went out, carved out a piece of land that would be adequate for them to raise enough crops to survive from year to year. And that is essentially how it was populated. There are large towns in Guatemala. Guatemala City is a very vibrant, active, large city with quality hotels and so forth. So you have the same situation we have in Mexico and a lot of the South American countries. Extreme wealth on the one hand and extreme poverty on the other. The interesting part of the people that are poverty-stricken, most of them don't know it. They don't realize it. They don't know what they're missing because they don't travel very far from that little piece of plot of ground that they've cultivated and raised their meager crops on. Kids looked happy, well-fed, but there was very definitely evidence of malnutrition in some areas. Teeth certainly looked terrible. There was no doctors to go see, no one to care for the children. In fact, no one to assist a woman in childbirth or anything else. It was all neighbor to neighbor at the most for assistance. Our Minnesota Air National Guard looked for a spot where they could do humanitarian service that would be of benefit to the people. Went there and discovered that many, many sectors of that country had no water supply, no supply of any water that would be potable, usable for drinking, and so forth. And one of their first efforts when they decided to go there for those 2-week intervals of every branch of the service was to establish wells, to build schools, to conduct health meetings where they did screening of people for health purposes. Those were the primary interests for the first year. The second and third years that they operated over there, they added other things such as bridges, flood control projects, and quite a number of other activities. But basically, they set up a permanent camp, very self-sufficient. This was all good training for our military, of course. They set up a base hospital. They had barracks, not barracks, but tents, tent city. For their feeding, they had a mess hall, a very large mess hall. All their people for any given 2-week period could be housed for meals. They operated with field rations rather than did a lot of cooking. It was the new packs that they have. You open and eat and drink your liquids with it. And they saw immediately that the packs were bigger than most people would eat, so they put up collection points at the head of that mess hall, and anything they didn't consume themselves was put into those baskets, huge containers, I should say, and then the public, the natives of the area, were allowed to help themselves to that at the end of every day. They built a sanitary system, sewage control, a well, made a landing strip, broke into a pile of volcanic ash that they used to cover the sandy soil that they have there. Otherwise, the props and helicopters and things that they used would raise up this horrendous cloud of dust. So they covered the entire runway and roadways in the immediate area of the camp with volcanic ash, but it was cinder-like material. It was almost like gravel, and that was a good thing that they did because it cut down the dust considerably. Set up their own communication system. It was a very viable experience for our military, and as I said, every branch of the service operated there for their 2 weeks of training. New people would come in every 2 weeks and would return with those flights of bringing the new groups in. They had a number of helicopters there. It's a mountainous area. Elevation rose to somewhere close to 12,000 feet. So you had different climatic conditions, from almost a desert-like area and very drought-like material, on up into the mountains where even snow and melting snow and so forth would cause rivers and riverlets. Whenever they had rainstorms down there, they'd have regular gully washers. They'd just wash out everything that was in their way. These arroyos that the water came down from the hills, took out whatever means they had made of their own for crossing. One area where we saw them install a bridge that was made here in Minnesota, a metal arch bridge that spanned approximately 35 feet. The year before, children were crossing that area, and one of these arroyos broke loose and water rushed down and drowned 13 children. So one of the first areas that they wanted to take care of was to put a bridge that people could cross safely when waters were at a high level. Roads were continually washed out when it rained, and when it was dry, it was just potholes everywhere. Very rough country. I can't describe it any other way. They would take out an area of land and level some of it as best they could. They had no farm equipment at all. Heavy handmade shovels with big club-like handles and hoes of similar construction. No source of water whatsoever. They put seed in the ground and hope, or pray, I hope, that they'd get moisture enough to germinate their crops. They always had the edges of whatever plot they had described as their property lined with trees that most were volunteers, or they'd stick stems on the ground and darned if they didn't grow. You couldn't do that in this country to save your soul, but down there that's what happens. And each year they'd go along and cut that hedgerow back and use everything above a certain height for firewood. There wasn't an area where they could go that was within easy walking distance to get other types of firewood, but that was what provided the fire for cooking and warmth and so forth. The schools that they did have were very meager, very few, but they were all, again, bamboo huts. Bamboo grows quite profusely in that area, and they would just drive ends of bamboo poles into the ground, weave them a little with plant material that was used like twine. No windows, no doors, benches only, nothing for the kids to write on. Had no paper for the kids to use. If any paper was used in their classrooms, it was paper they brought in themselves. They had no supply system that offered anything of that sort. It was abject poverty. There's no two ways about it. It was difficult to see, to think that people existed that way. On the other hand, as I said, those kids were always smiling, happy, laughing. There were no such thing as bathrooms. It was just a log out back of that school, and that was their latrine, and everybody used the same facility. Pigs and chickens ran through those buildings just at will. Whenever they wanted to get to the other side of the school, they went through the school. They didn't go around it. They did have chickens and pigs for most families. Very, very few cows. I saw a handful the entire time I was there of cattle. Very, very few. Some of the land in Guatemala is very productive. It's a settlement of volcanic ash that had been a crater from an active volcano, and that turned into land that's very, very able to support good growth. And they had major crops. Those areas had been taken over by the wealthy of Guatemala. I saw 12 brand new Ford tractors working on one farm. So there were sizable farms in that valley. But they had no infrastructure, no roads to get those crops out to cities or to be able to sell the crops. While we were there, there was evidence of a highway being constructed from two sides of that part of the isthmus of this big area. And, you know, it didn't look, as you looked across, you could see the ends, and it looked like they were going to have to make about at least one S-turn to make the two connect. I don't know who laid it out, but somebody didn't really look ahead, or plan ahead, as we say. Let me tell you just a little bit about the screening clinics that we witnessed and saw, and that were put on periodically over there during the entire summer-long period of troops that were over there. They had military personnel who were doctors and dentists and eye specialists, and several weeks in advance they took helicopters with pamphlets and dropped those pamphlets throughout the countryside up there, in the mountainous areas primarily, advertising that there would be a gathering of people, and that gathering of people took place in what was usually their marketplace. It was fairly large, had some buildings all open, but a little more substantial structure than just bamboo. They were mud type huts with roofs on. They all leaked like sieves if it rained, but nonetheless they were there. They dropped these pamphlets, and people walked 2.5 days to get to that screening clinic. They have no transportation whatsoever, no bicycles or anything of the sort, and they walked for 2.5 days. They formed a long, long line. I would say it was at least a block long. The temperatures when we were there were in the hundreds. It was 110 the day I was there, for the most part, watching this thing. Not one person griped or worried about being out in 110-degree temperature. They just waited in line for their turn to go through what was a triage center. The line was single up to that point and then veered into 3 separate locations. One for medical illness of any sort, they were diverted to one line. For eyes, glasses, that sort of thing, they went to another line. Dentistry for another one. And they did have a 4th one for OB/GYN. Pregnant mothers and so forth were taken separately to a 4th line. And they also had Planned Parenthood. That was another part of that aspect of it, trying to tell them that not to continue to raise children if they couldn't afford to keep them. It was very interesting to watch these people go through that line. It was evident that some of them were in very, very poor health. Many of the elderly, it must have been miraculous that they even got there. And again, in the area of kids, it was quite evident that some of those kids were extremely in need of attention. And I may have mentioned last time I talked to you about a couple of the kids that we saw go through, one of which complained about stomach. And in questioning, they determined that along the way he had gotten thirsty and he reached into a ditch, found a can that had some liquid in it and drank it, and it was poison. And it was an insecticide, and he had ingested that, and that was what was causing his stomach problems. Another one said he lost his sight, and there again they questioned him, and he too had found a can in the ditch, picked it up with liquid in it, drank it, and that was antifreeze, and he went immediately blind. Now, that's the kind of thing that took place. I saw it. I'm a witness to it, so I know that it's factual. What happened to those kids, I have no idea. They were taken off separately to go to a hospital someplace. They were taken by our military to a hospital. But what happened to them after that, I don't know. But most of them received some kind of treatment. Those that were in need of glasses were diverted to one particular building where the military, when they came down there, brought down from the Lions Club collection of glasses, thousands of pairs of glasses, and they had them classified. They did have the machine that they could look into the eyes and determine what would be beneficial and the power setting that would be necessary, and they'd be able to go to that file of glasses and find one that was reasonably close to what would be ground if they were to grind new lenses for them. They'd try on several pairs till they found a pair that to them looked good, and then they'd have a mirror and the people would look into it, and finally they'd agree to accept a pair. They ran out of cases very early on in that screening clinic, and the next thing they could do was to wrap them in a Kleenex. It was ironic to me to have these people glad to get these glasses, really feeling that they had something good, but they put them in their pocket immediately and didn't wear them. And we said, well, is this going to continue that way? Will they ever wear them? Yes, in private they would wear them, but their custom is, if you're looking through glasses, I'm not looking eye to eye to you. My glasses have to be off, yours has to be off. You're looking eye to eye to converse with people, and they don't believe in having a pair of glasses interfere, which was kind of unique and different. But and then other things that we saw, the dental chairs were right out in the open. One woman had all of her teeth removed, no anesthetic whatsoever. Every tooth in her mouth was pulled at one sitting, blood streaming down her face. She got out of the chair, bowed and thanked, and smiled a big smile, bloody smile, grateful for what they had done for her in pulling these teeth. And they did commit to seeing her several weeks later and seeing that she got fitted with artificial teeth. But her teeth were so bad, nothing could have been done to save any of them. So that's what the solution was. Other areas, I mentioned that they built schools. The schools they built were built in stages by military personnel, again, from the various branches. The Navy, for the most part, spent almost their entire 2 weeks putting in real shallow footings and pouring slabs on which the school building itself would be built. And then walls were built with 4-inch thick blocks that were actual cement blocks, lightweight cement blocks, and room dividers. They had 2 or 3 rooms in each of the schools for grade separation, doors into each section, windows. The roofs were elevated above the walls a little bit, so there was air circulation over the top. And the roof itself was made of a material that we used to use readily here in this country, and it was outlawed because it was asbestos and cement, transite.